Morning intuitives. Yeah, yet again another before work video. I'm stepping away from the INFJ stuff for this video. This one's going to be sort of like a narcissism video. It's going to be a little tinfoil hatty, but I've noticed some patterns and I think I've pieced them together. And, I'd like to know what all of you think, particularly those of you that watch this channel that were, like me, born in the 1980s. So, I've noticed in a lot of ways that those of us born in the 80s, and for a lot of what I'm going to talk about, you can include people that were born in the late 70s as well, but particularly those of us born in the 80s, are the new lost generation. And it appears that those in power, mainly the baby boomers, the white male baby boomers in particular, have absolutely no empathy to what a raw deal uh, we've been given, and essentially we exist only to serve them in their eyes. Like nothing we do is, no matter what we do, no matter the standards that they themselves set, they just continuously move the goalpost on us, unless of course you've been anointed by one of them as their successor in the old boys club, of course, because I have tradition. But I was talking to a handful of coworkers and people I've known over the years about this in the past few days, and it really started to see a pattern emerging. So it'll be somewhat of a generalization, but the facts bear out at least the examples that I'm given. For those of us born in the 80s, it seems like we, like most INFJs like myself, are not ever in the right place at the right time. Like we, either it just missed something or it fell apart right as we were getting there. So, for example, those of us born in the 80s, for the most part, we started elementary school during the George H.W. Bush presidency. And, I'm not going to get too deep into what happened in the 90s, but neoliberalism took over the Democratic Party, and the Democrats became moderate Republicans after Reagan shifted the Republicans far right, and thus, shifted away from the post-war Keynesian consensus and rejected the New Deal, not only the ideology of FDR, but also the ideology of, General Dwight Eisenhower, who a lot of Republicans today, by their definition of what socialism is, they would call him a socialist, if not a communist. Really, General Dwight Eisenhower. That deification of Reagan really fucked the country over. But anyway, we're not going to get too deep into policy here, so I'll just hit on some of the broad points. So at the time when we were kids, starting elementary school, things like NAFTA hadn't happened yet. And particularly like me, if you grew up in PA, a lot of the adults you knew had, pretty decent paying union jobs with good benefits and pensions. And these are people that only had a high school diploma. Well, the vast majority of those, I would say at least 80%, if not more. I think it probably varies area to area, but the vast majority of those jobs were gone by the end of the 90s, when even the oldest of the 80s babies were just emerging into the world. So that option is not there. The union steel mill, or the union factory job, anything in manufacturing that was once the hub of this economy, gone. And the austerity team came in, despite the fact that in 1992 Ross Perot warned the baby boomers about that, saying, we're selling off our children's future just so you fat cats can get a little fatter. Remember, the economy's going to go to hell. People that don't make anything can't buy anything because they don't have the money to buy it. And it's demand what controls the economy, not supply. I grew up working class in Texas, and I'm a billionaire. I didn't inherit my money. I know how business works. And for the most part, Perot knew what he was talking about, and he truly was a self-made man. I never understood the admiration for, these very wealthy businessmen who inherited that business from their father. It's one thing to admire the person who initially built it, probably a robber baron, but, like someone like Trump, it's like, I'm a billionaire. Yeah. It's like you inherited like over $400 million from your old man, and you had a famous name, and were established in the business. Small loan of $1 million. Well, that's not really being true because most people think, well, $1 million isn't that much money, really, anymore. Yeah, well, okay, you can think that, but $1 million was a lot more money in 1970 when he got that small loan. You have to put it into context as to when it happened, and it's not as if he was a, unknown nobody upstarter. He was, a silver spoon prick from a wealthy real estate family that was already well established. Context. That's like saying, you know, Kylie Jenner is a self-made billionaire. It's like when you're born a 100 millionaire into a celebrity family that has a reality show to promote what you're doing. That's more than a little head start in my book. But credit where credit's due. Ross Perot's the real deal, or was. He passed away a few years ago. So back to my point, because I always drift off onto a side point. NAFTA happened. There goes, you know, the hub of the economy, particularly if, like me, you're from the Rust Belt. Something else happens at this time. This affects Gen X first. Price of college goes through the roof. I've said it before in other videos, and I'll say it now. When I graduated Penn State in 2009, I paid triple what my father did in 1978. And let me be clear, I will explain this. When I say I paid triple, I'm talking after I took his 1978 tuition rate, put it in an inflation calculator, and adjusted it to $2009. And it's also important to note, we both attended that university as in-state students. We were both Pennsylvania residents, which your residency in a state school, if you don't know, affects your tuition rate. So how's that fair? Oh, and who jacked up those prices? Oh yeah, baby boomers did that too. Baby boomers at the same time, around late 90s, early 2000s, created the for-profit university scam. They created the private student loan so they could, keep stuff in their pockets. Another thing that happened at this time, housing prices go through the roof. Now it's Gen X who's buying them, but who's the one selling them stuff in their pockets? Baby boomers. And if you're like a poor boomer, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the leadership of that generation and how they're filled with nothing but narcissism and greed. I'm talking about the Nancy Pelosi's, the George W. Bushes, the Mitch McConnells, the Bill Clintons, that whole crew. The neoliberal gang. So, who still to this day don't have enough. Their greed and narcissism has no ends. Their only way to be rid of them is for them to finally die. Because tradition and legacy, and we're in the club and we'll never go away. Even if Pelosi's sitting up there looking like she's half in the bag with her dentures swimming in her mouth, with like looks like she got it looks like she got too much Botox. It's ridiculous how hard these people on both sides will fight like hell to maintain a broken neoliberal corporatist system that they know is broken. They've known it for decades, but it's also made them rich. And if we do get positive progressive change and akin to the New Deal, they can't have that while they're alive, because it will expose, because the prosperity it would create would expose just how inept and corrupt they have been their entire careers in office, and how it's all been about them. That's a lot in that generation, to be clear. So, housing prices, college are through the roof. The union jobs are all but gone. At best, they're like an endangered species. All right. So for the older end people in the 80s, and more so for the later end Gen Xers, something happened in the early 2000s, dot-com bubble, which a lot of people were getting into that industry, as I said, as jobs in manufacturing and all types of union places like that weren't available. Another big thing that often gets overlooked at this point when people of this age are coming into the workforce, and thanks Slick Willie for this. the minimizing of the public sector. So a lot of jobs in the public sector that, boomers had that were, nice, cushy pension jobs, they simply did away with them. And worse yet, if they weren't needed, but yet you let it ride for another like 10 years to let that boomer keep working. But, all for them, apparently, all for them. Pensions were, by and large done away with at this time, unless you work in fire or police. But they got theirs, and, you know, explain that. Why did they get them? Why did they get to say, well, we're going to keep this for us? And all of you young people have to pay into it. But when your time's done, you won't get them because we said so. We get to decide what we get, and we get to decide what you get because we're baby boomers. So you have that thrown in the mix. And years pass. You have 9/11, obviously, in Iraq, which a lot of, mostly men born in the 80s were now called to combat. Afghanistan, I understand, but Iraq, we shouldn't have been there. We went there on a lie out of boomer greed for oil, and so George Bush could be like, he tried to kill my daddy. My daddy think I'm a loser. I'm going to overthrow the guy who tried to kill my daddy. Show him, daddy, I'm better than Jeb. Laura. That wasn't very good. I haven't done a W voice in a long time because I haven't had the need to, because he mostly hides now. I think he had to walk back to Texas after his term was over. If you leave office, in a recession with an approval rating of 22, you should have to walk back to Texas from the White House. But most of that's on Cheney more than him, because we all know who is really in charge. So all through this time again, in the 2000s, Bush redid Reaganomics again, tax cuts for the rich, boom bust cycles again. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but the wealthy, mainly boomers, got even more money while things for education, vocational programs were closed. Firehouses were closed in a lot of cities. John Kerry, and I'm not a fan of him, rightfully pointed that out in the 2004 debate, because I was applying or beginning to apply to be a firefighter at that time. And Kerry rightfully brought up, because firehouses budgets are cut in cities, the fire department's almost always first on the chopping block. Cities were closing firehouses because Bush was taking money away from cities, so Bush could build firehouses in Baghdad. I think most Americans would, want, say you live in Philadelphia, would want the firehouse that's around the corner to stay open in case you need them. Big difference between, especially an ambulance, getting there in 2 minutes or getting there in 10 minutes. Call that the platinum 10 minutes in the business, but never mind about that. So you have that going on. And then, of course, we reach the big one, the recession. Yeah, the recession. Worst recession that we have seen since the Great Depression. That's what all the economists say. I know boomers will cry that the Volcker recession was worse, because of course it was worse. It happened to them. To a lot of boomers, if it happens to them, it's the only thing that matters and nothing else matters. Like, if, uh, you know, if somebody, like, absolutely destroyed your car, the boomers would be like, well, I had a flat tire, same difference. That affected me. Anything that affects me is more important because I'm me and you exist only to serve me. Now serve me. We are baby boomers. So, yeah. Right. And boomers, if you're getting offended, I'm mostly ranting about boomers that I'm related to in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and their crewing friends. So if you are among those ranks, by all means come at me and we can discuss facts about how this corrupt good old boys club of a county works. But by and large, unless you're from a boomer from this area, or if you are an oligarch and part of the DLC Third Way or, Reaganite club, this ain't about you. So, but it is a little bit about you in that you let this happen. There seems to be this tribalism amongst boomers that I have to mention, another sidebar. But I've noticed among boomers that first and foremost they are boomers. They're not Americans, they're not Canadians, they're boomers. They're not Italians, they're not Irish, they're not Jewish. They're boomers. Like, their boomer identity comes first, even in terms of like things like gay, straight, and things that they may be oppressed for it. First and foremost, they are boomers. Like great example of a baby boomer supremacist. Ellen DeGeneres, first and foremost, is a baby boomer. She's not a gay rights activist. She's not a lesbian. First and foremost, she is a baby boomer. And that seems to be something, unique to that generation, where that solidarity as their generation, due to largely, especially among white boomers, due to their homogenous upbringing. And if you're wondering what the fuck I'm talking about, read A Generation of Sociopaths by Bruce Cannon Gibney. He's a Gen Xer and a wealthy venture capitalist. He wrote a whole book on a lot of what I'm talking about right now and did a lot of actually thorough research. He wasn't just stringing together pieces of his intuition. But the recession happens, absolutely obliterates those of us that are just coming out of university or had just graduated, because now jobs are disappearing left and right, and people with 10 years experience are taking entry-level jobs. This starts a new trend that I might want to mention. So by and large, when the boomers were getting out of school, going into work, entry-level meant entry-level, meant 0 years experience, maybe an internship. Certain jobs, of course, did require a college education, but it didn't require obscure job-specific certifications. You got those on the job. See, they had these things called training programs. The World War II generation was very big about them, but it seems like once they left and the boomers came in, it's like, train, hit the ground running, steep learning curve. Sit here, organize my pens, and, talk about how great we did things in the 80s. Then help, excel. Hey, we didn't do this back in the day. This is stupid. Back in the 80s, we did this. Back in the 80s, I could have scotch on my desk. Back in the 80s, back in the 80s, back in the 80s, I love Reagan. A little bit of hyperbole, but not much, to be honest. So the point of that was to explain how the requirements that boomers had for jobs, even entry-level jobs, were 3 to 5 years in this exact job. It's like, well, you need to get experience to get experience. This is entry-level. Well, how do you get experience? Well, all in all, you have to know the right person, because a lot of boomers also benefited from the old boys club, where, they basically got their first job by, this is their uncle's friend, and they shook hands and, made sure they didn't smell like beer at the time. And they were hired. And a lot of times, not just hired and given a fair shot, but protected throughout based on, who they related to, who they're friends with, because it's all big club. And they hate having to compete with people of color or women, because then they'd have to compete with people on merit. And somebody's ability to do that job would be more important than, well, my uncle worked here for 30 years. Ain't that enough? What are you talking about? Yeah. Those that bitch about, minorities and women in the workforce are people who, are upset that they're not coasting on the old boys club, because they need that. The idea of having to stand out of the pack instead of being related to the right person, they can't do that. But sadly, the old boys club, by and large, is still around. It's a little better at hiding itself in most places, not in Chester County. In Chester County, they'll tell you that's the way we've always done it, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And it's corruption anywhere else, but it's not corruption when we do it, because we said so. We're the best. And they'll say that essentially that to you with a straight face and attack you for calling them corrupt, because Chester County has more infallibility than the Pope. It is, to a lot of the people who've lived here and only here, it is like a religious institution to them. I don't know why, and they won't explain it, but nonetheless, they will defend it at all costs. So you have, for those of us in the 80s, again, this warped sense of how to get on, the ladder, which boomers burned the ladders and, tried to retroactively destroy manuals that talked about the creation of ladders, tried to rewrite history and say that ladders never existed, and then talked about just, what great jumpers they were. So, the upward mobility in careers went to hell. It was on a small decline, but it went off a cliff really at the recession, when those of us born in the 80s, by and large, were entering the workforce. Another thing that happened was wages used to rise with productivity. Yeah, that stopped under Reagan and really took off under Clinton once the whole NAFTA thing happened. So more and more money, once the younger generations got into the workforce, more and more money went to the people at the top. Who are those people at the top? By and large, baby boomers. There's been a lot of data done about like how much money people made in like specific jobs during specific years. Like, what did a accountant make 3 years into their career in 1982 as opposed to 2013? Well, it turns out that those of us born in the 80s, and this is all in inflation adjusted dollars, are making on average about 20% less than the boomers made like in the 1980s, during the same stage in their career with the same degree and everything the same other than what year it is. 20% less, and on average work, about 6 hours more. So there again, more for them, none for us. It's not that but we're entitled because we want some of what they got. But we're told to, like, if it was a pizza, the boomers would take 7 slices and give us one and say we should be ever so grateful, on our knees, thankful to the gods for what they've given us, because really they deserve not only the whole pizza, but more than that, just for being them, just for being born in the year they were in, which is the essence of baby boomer supremacism, which not all baby boomers are, of course, but the ones that aren't called out on it. We have one in the White House now. I have no empathy for younger generations. Give me a break. I'm Joe Biden, king of the baby boomers. So there's that. And another thing that's often overlooked, I'm just trying to hit the bullet points of the big ones because this is already going long, but the trades. Everybody tries to retroactively say to people born in the 80s, well, you should have went in the trades. Well, when we were in, high school at the time, you would have been going to vocational school. In the late 90s, early 2000s, nobody was saying that. It was all college, 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 college. And they talk about all these openings in the trades. And yes, that's been true for, about the past 5 years. But you can't retroactively apply that 15 years in the past. The boomers at the time, who were our teachers, our parents, our guidance counselors, were not saying that. Because it's important to note, all these old men that are retiring in these trades are baby boomers. When those of us born in the 80s, would have been the age of people emerging from high school now, all of these old men that are retiring would have been in their 40s. They would have had at least 10 more years of their career left. So, you would expect like some 16-year-old kid to be like, I'm going to go to Votech into a trade where I know there's no jobs, but I just know that, in 10 years there'll be lots of openings. I don't know what I'm going to do for 10 years to survive, or how I'm going to keep my skills current for 10 years, because, industries advance over time. Things become antiquated and outdated. Unless, of course, it's from the 80s. Then it's the greatest thing that's ever existed. At least that's what I've been told. So you have that dilemma as well. So, in summary, union jobs gone, pensions gone, college triple the cost, housing prices through the roof. Not really many, at least not vast amounts of openings in the trades, minimalization of the public sector, uh, you know, insane requirements for entry-level jobs, i.e., you couldn't do it. Well, we're not going to give you a chance because this is ours. And this continues to this day. I need to make one more point. Even now, like people in the 80s who have put their time in and, earned their spot up on the ladder, even though the goalposts kept moving. Now, even after they did everything they were told for 10 or 15 years, they're not getting the move up. Why? Because now there's this proliferation of consultants. So what a lot of boomers are doing is instead of promoting somebody younger, because that may threaten the boomers that are still there, they're giving cushy essentially do nothing consultant jobs to their retired boomer buddies, and the consultant will make 80 grand a year and put in maybe 8 hours a week and spend the rest of the time golfing. I know a lot of them, and they've even admitted it's a racket. Are there some consultants that are actually legit? Yeah, but this proliferation of them within the last 5 years that coincides right at the vast retirement of the baby boomers is awfully suspicious and convenient. But then again, they seem to have been in the right place at the right time for everything, with the exception of those that had to go to Vietnam. But those weren't the rich ones. They got 5 deferments, just ask Cheney. So it does seem that those of us born in the 80s are the new lost generation. No one ever gave a shit about us because now it's all about the younger generations that can't even work full-time summer jobs. They're not doing what we had to. We had to do. Those of us in the 80s were told by the boomers, you know, to do basically what they had to do, but the reward never came, and we had to go into debt just to go through the trials and tribulations. And again, they have no empathy for us, and they try to take our voice away from speaking up. But know this, my fellow 80s babies, you have just as much rights as an adult as a baby boomer does. You can vote, you can speak up. A baby boomer is not your superior. They are not the aristocracy. They do not have extra rights based on the year they were born. Even if they try to convince you of that you are somehow a second class citizen to them, you're not. You want to call a baby boomer out on their bullshit, call them out.